Welcome to the Simsbury Free Library. We're so happy you're here. We're thrilled to have Cara Labella joining us. Please come in. We have plenty of seats. So I have a little introduction about Cara. She sent me over her biography. And she is an emerita professor of the Connecticut State System, and in 2015 she won the Excellence in Teaching Award. She's a member of the Friends of the State of Archaeologists out of Yukon and the Connecticut Gravestone Network under Ruth Shipley Brown. These organizations seek to preserve Connecticut state legends and history, and she is currently, thank you, a programmer for the Connecticut Library Consortium and co-facilitates the Simsbury Writers Group out of our Simsbury Public Library. So tonight, Cara's here to share the historical background of her most recent historical novel. She also has written The French Paymaster and the Simsbury Witches. Welcome, Cara. Welcome, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So, to begin with gratitude, which I always think is a good place to start, I'm very grateful to all of you for coming out in the weather. I just wondered who would be turning out this evening, in threat of storm. So thank you all for coming to share an evening of legend and lore. A special thank you to Simsbury Free Library, Tara Willova, who could not join us, Sarah, Laura, Julia, Ira. Very grateful to you all for supporting me and inviting me to speak for the community here tonight. So grateful. I did work here for a time, and it was a wonderful experience. I mean, just a wealth of resources here. So I am hoping that you might consider a free will donation tonight. It's entirely your discretion, but this keeps our legends and our history alive. So at your discretion, of course. Allison Watson-Maston, previous genealogist for us, just an amazing person. We have my husband David, who is my box office and my creative consultant and my tech roadie guy, and just keeps me supported throughout. My neighbor and friend Joyce Duncan, who told me I could write my first book when I didn't know if I could. Just many, many thanks. And again to you all for coming out tonight. So, just to mention, if anyone is interested in the history of the Simsbury Witches, I'll be doing a program at the Public Library here in Simsbury on Tuesday, October 28th at 7 o'clock, and that's free, and it's in the Friends Room. So I'd love to see you there, especially those people who are returning. It means a lot. Thanks for coming. So glad. My husband's books are here as well. He's a programmer like me on the Connecticut Library Consortium circuit. So his works are bona fide history and landscape photography. I work in legend, really, and then I do the research to see if the legend can be verified. Any facts and figures, I spend about a year looking up as much as I can, and then spend a year on writing. So it takes me about 2 years per book. And I just want to sort of deliver that caveat because I am a mixture of legend and history and fiction. So I try to help them all work together to create an interesting story. So without further ado, how many have been to Abigail's? Is that everybody? I think it's everybody. It's everybody. Has anybody had a paranormal experience there? We're going to take a deep dive at the end, right? Because I love question and answer. We'll save that for the end, but I definitely want to hear your story and anyone else who wants to speak on that. If not there, has anyone had a paranormal experience apart from that? I'm alone in the room, but that's okay. That is all right. We can talk about that and anything else you care to at the end. But here is the legend, and this may be the version that you know. I looked up all the versions of the legend that I could find, and they were very spare. So here is what we have, and this is what is in their literature at the tavern. Abigail Pettibone was murdered by her seafaring husband, who came home unexpectedly to find her in the arms of her lover. But is this all there is to know? So when I thought about writing this book, and this was at a friend's urging, I really did not know if I would be equal to it. It seemed like a very important legend in the context of Simsbury. But really an interesting place to start was not at the beginning. And when I say that, what I mean is, has anybody seen Towards Zero on BritBox, Amazon Prime? It's an Agatha Christie remake, and it's like a manor house mystery set in the 20s. It's delightful. If you get a chance to see it, please watch it. And the trailer, and this is why we've got BritBox, because the trailer was so scintillating, and it began with the old family lawyer, the old family retainer saying, I love a good murder mystery, but you know, they begin in the wrong place. And when I saw that, and he went through his explanation, I had to agree. Very often in our current entertainment, in our novels, we begin with the murder. We begin with the big event, when in fact, the story starts over here. What was said, what went unsaid, what was done, what went undone, way back here, to lead us to the point of adultery and murder here in Simsbury. So it was finding the backstory that was really my challenge. Finding the backstory. And since facts were thin on the ground, because we have one name, Abigail Pettibone, and then there's the question of whether she was born a Pettibone or married a Pettibone. You know, many, many questions. So I turned to the town of Simsbury. I turned to Simsbury in 1830 to tell me who these people were. What were their challenges? What were the influences on them at that point in history that would inform the background of this love triangle? Now we all know love triangles, don't raise your hands, love triangles are so intense. There is passion, there is doubt and fear, there is going up against societal norms, there is secrecy and fear of discovery. Everyone's between a rock and a hard place. So this is a human situation that we know. So here's where I started, with the love triangle and finding the backstory through the history of 1830s Simsbury. So I will begin with the facts first. We do know that Abigail's exists, we've all been there. And this is just a representation. What you see on the cover, this is an actual picture of the historical Pettibone Tavern gotten from the Simsbury Historical Society, who also supports me in my research. So if you want to have a look at that, please do. My husband modified the image so we could use it for the cover, very grateful for that. So here we see the facts as Pettibones themselves presents them most times. Established in 1780, right in the midst of the American Revolution, and many notable names supposedly stayed at the inn or passed through on their way to other places, supposedly General George Washington, right? Now the Historical Society raises their eyebrows a little bit. They're like, I don't think so. But it may have happened. It could be. John Adams supposedly stayed there. Ethan Allen of the Green Mountain Boys supposedly was there. And also Harriet Beecher Stowe, who may have been traveling between Nook Farm in Hartford, where her sister Catherine Beecher ran the Hartford Female Seminary, over to Massachusetts, where her parents resided. So a number of famous names may well have passed through the tavern's doors. A fire in 1800, set by a member of one of the local tribes. Historically, if accounts can be believed, our relations to the native tribes were fairly good until the Pequot War. And so instances like this were rare, as I understand it. But the inn was burned, it was rebuilt in 1803, it was renovated in the 2000s at least once, somewhere I think twice between 2003 and 2013. And you may have remembered as the Chart House and various other iterations, you know, in its history. Now, a secret tunnel does exist, and we just had a word about this. Between the Pettibone Tavern And this was created supposedly when it was owned by Jonathan Pettibone, who was the most famous owner. And supposedly the tunnel runs under the carriage road over to that lovely red colonial, the large red colonial that you see on the other side of the road. And supposedly this was created because Jonathan and his brother Virgil were estranged and did not want to see each other above ground for any reason. Now, why this was so, was it about money, was it about property, mom loved you best, I just don't know. But apparently that was the reason for the tunnel. And they even designated different doorways through which to enter the tavern, should they ever have the misfortune to both be above ground, entering at the same time. They did not want to run into each other in a doorway. Isn't that something? We can have a conversation about families, but we won't. So that is an interesting piece of the history of the tavern, but we know too, especially in the Revolutionary War context, tunnels could be used to house arms. They could be used to hide contraband. They could be used to hide men. There is supposedly a story that this tunnel was used as a stop on the Underground Railroad. I have not seen this verified, but that is a story that we have in Simsbury, and it is possible. Supposedly there are shackles down in the basement. These would not be for freedom seekers, because we did not have slaves by that time. We had free black families as of 1811 in Simsbury, so most likely they were used as like jail apparatus, a tavern being a town center, maybe for court cases and cultural fairs, all manner of social events, right? So most likely it could have been used as a holding place or a jail. And then lastly, we see that it was used as a seasonal morgue. And this I found out from Dory Zinsky, who wrote the book Haunted Simsbury and Avon. Supposedly, our citizens, if they died during the winter, their bodies had to be kept until the spring thaw. And so a safe place was considered to be the basement and against the outer wall of the tavern as the coldest safe place that they could find. That's the story. Now, how could Abigail's not be haunted? I ask you. When we consider if that is true, how could it not be haunted, right? So we know the inn exists and it has a very rich history. Another piece of history includes the Reverend Alan McLean, and I'll show you why I start with him in a moment in the next slide. The Reverend Alan McLean was the grandfather of George P. McLean, who was the ecological U.S. Senator, and he started programs, right? And there's a wealth of information right in the next room about him. The Reverend Alan McLean was his grandfather, and George P. was 4 years old when his grandfather died. So they knew each other. The Reverend Alan McLean was a very special man in the context of Simsbury history. He was pastor here at the Congregational Church for 42 years, first in an active capacity and then a diminishing capacity as age came upon him. He was born in Vernon, Connecticut, of Scottish descent. He went to Yale around 1805. In 1808, he came to become pastor of Simsbury's church. And this was because the Reverend Stebbins had been dismissed. Why had the Reverend Stebbins been dismissed? Well, there was a problem with drink, apparently. A problem with drink, but also a problem with contention. The Reverend Stebbins liked to bring town issues into the pulpit and call people out during worship and just sort of stir the pot in this way. And so Reverend Stebbins found himself dismissed in 1808, and the Reverend Alan McLean was brought in his place. An earnest, fervent preacher, the records say. And he was part of the Second Great Awakening. As you probably remember, the First Great Awakening was about a century prior, 1735 to 1745. And now we have the Reverend McLean in 1830, about 100 years later, joining with other pastors, trying to bring the flock back to worship, trying to recenter on faith. So he was part of that movement. It was not as strong in Connecticut as other places, New York State. It was stronger down south. There was more evidence of real revival, but Reverend Allen tried to bring people together here. And he weathered a great number of adversities. A great number, as you see here. He was a shepherd during the spotted fever epidemic. Now, most of Connecticut seems to have suffered more from measles and smallpox. But here, and also in Middletown, there was a sweeping bout of the spotted fever, and there'll be more about this later. It carried away 100 citizens, and in a town of 2,200, this was quite a number. And they lost about 35 per year for several years after that. So he was shepherd during that time. And also at the time of the demise of the Farmington Canal, which used to run, obviously, right down here in Hot Meadow. It was dug, broke ground, I think, in 1825, and by 1830, it was struggling. It was struggling, and it had been subject to a great deal of sabotage. Farmers, other landowners, did not like their boundaries being crossed, their land, being divided differently. They didn't like the water courses being altered. And so people would come out in the night and they would fill in the canal. They would take rocks and throw them in, they would dig, and they would fill in the dirt. And so by 1830, the canal was, running to an end. A firm in Massachusetts, I think, had tried to come in and save it, but this came to nothing. So this was another trial that the Reverend Allen McLean saw his flock through in 1830. One of the smartest things he did, and this was in direct opposition to the Reverend Stebbins, was he built a separate building for town meetings. So we know that there's the church there, and that the church and the tavern, the inn, Pettibone's most likely, and Phelps over here. These would be the places people would gather and, speak about the matters that, came to their mind. Well, Reverend Allen said, we're not going to do that. We're going to create a separate building, and I believe that's what we call like the Boy Scouts Hall down there now. He created that building so that people could go, have their town meetings, disagree all they liked, but come back together in worship and fellowship on Sundays and trying to keep his community together. So he was a great unifier. And an interesting fact about him, well, there are many, but he was a temperance man, and that, again, flies in the face of Reverend Stebbins. But his best friend, one of his very best friends, was Forrest Belden, who was the leading distiller in Simsbury. So you see here, he knew how to love the sinner, but not the sin. He was fair-minded, he loved to listen. He went to people's homes, he started a school for boys. He was active in so many ways, and the town loved him. He was a wonderful figure. Now, a sad piece toward the end of his life. I bring it forward in the book. This would have happened a bit later in his life than you'll see if you read the story. But he began to lose his eyesight. He began to go blind. And what he laments as the book opens is not so much his waning eyesight, which he's beginning to detect, but his lack of spiritual sight, his lack of spiritual insight, that he did not see the adultery, he did not see the murder coming to fruition. He did not see these things, in spite of little clues that he picks up in hindsight throughout the story. He acts as the stage manager. Our Town, read it, watched it, yeah. So I tried to use him in such a way that he was the stage manager. He gives us a context of the town and what is happening, but he also gives us a view from the outside of what the Pettibones are doing and what the situation looks like. So he is narrating in regret after all has passed, and he becomes part of the chilling evening itself at the end. So, here's the one name we have, Abigail Pettibone, and as mentioned, this was a problem because I really, had no guarantee that if I made a choice between the Abigail Pettibones in town, that I would choose the right one. Some were older when they died. I believe one was in her 90s and a spinster. The last person you see here, the Abigail Phelps became Abigail Pettibone, but by then it was a second marriage and she had grown children. It did not seem likely to me. So I put my gaze on these first two options and settled primarily on the first but ruled in the second. Jarvis Pettibone and Abigail Harrington, according to church record, married by Reverend Allen McLean in 1825, 5 years before I let the story open. So this was the identity I chose. Now other people might find more in time to come and that would change the narrative, but this seemed the most likely to me. And this ties them to Reverend McLean, who is a historical figure. Second, we have Natty Pettibone, which is short for Abigail, consort of Elias, who died October 1806, age 24. So that's a possibility as well. She died young, perhaps he was the sea captain, but when I went into records, there was actually a document I found where Jarvis and Elias were the same person. Now, and this probably gets back to the fact that in many of our families, and especially back in the day, you know, the same name ran down through generations, and it ran sideways through cousins and siblings and their children. So finding, you know, concrete identities was a little harder than I thought, but this was my reasoning. Jarvis Elias Pettibone, married to Abigail Harrington. So this is where I chose to begin. Now, how many of us have been to Warner's? Have we been to Warner's, the nursery there, right? So, delightful place, and Joyce was with me. I was with Joyce, actually, because she's an incredible gardener, and I'm so not. But it was a wonderful day out, just for friends, and I went to look at the cards and the gifts and the antiques and that sort of thing. And she's telling the manager there that day, and I don't know who it was, but she was telling the manager that I was writing the book, and I was about halfway through or so at this point. And didn't that lady, she came right out from behind the counter, she came out, and she put her hands on her hips, and she said, that Abigail, she said, she led men down to the river, and it was a scandal, and it was a whole thing, and she was impassioned. And I was struck by that. I was struck by that. We have strong feelings about Abigail in town here, and anyone who's been there and enjoyed the inn, we have strong feelings. Other people, I love her, I look for her ghost, all that. I wanted to do her justice. So it was a challenge here to find out who she was. Was she a harlot and a temptress? And a loose woman? Was it as simple as that? Was she in search of love, as we all are at some point, at many points in our lives? Was she in search of love? Was it an act of revenge to have an affair? Was it an act of revenge? Was her husband unkind? And the rumors, the oral tradition says that Captain Pettibone was not a nice man. And in fact, the manager told Dave and I when we took our tour that a party of friends, you know, did a selfie, you know, of their lunch at the tavern, and the captain photobombed them. And he did not look happy. And they recognized him from the portrait that was in the lobby. So, you know, was there revenge in there? Did she feel like she needed an escape from her life that was restricted, living with Jarvis's family while he was away at sea? What were her reasons? This was a big task, trying to do justice to who Abigail might have been. And I suspect it really was not very simple. Now, if we take a look at Jarvis, working with the idea that he was a sea captain, we don't know if it was a merchant vessel, we don't know if it was a whaler. Whalers were in business right up until about 1840 or so, I believe. But we know it was a hard life regardless at sea. We know that when Jarvis would return, you know, how late he would be, what he would bring back with him, all those things were uncertain. So a sea captain could count on being at sea, depending on the size of his ship and the nature of the voyage and the, you know, the exchanges and takings that you were looking for. He could be gone anywhere from 6 months to 3 or 4 years. Now, the Pettibones have been married 5 years. Did they spend a year out of 5 together? Did they spend 2 years out of 5 together? Simply by the nature of his profession, there's a question. So typically, you know, Jarvis would have left in the early spring and, bound for the Azores or the West Indies, Cape Verde, Falklands, Portugal, Brazil, in search, of goods or in search of whales. So he would have been gone anywhere from, again, 6 months to 2 or 3 years. That is a long time. And needless to say, the dangers were many. We call them weather events now, right? But of course, there would be tidal waves, there would be hurricanes, there would be any number of different kinds of storms at sea that could disable a ship, that could, decimate your crew. There could be fires on board, which could disable a ship as well. And this is aside from the human aspect of it, which would take in desertions, mutinies, drunkenness, having to give out punishment to your crew if anyone, performed an infraction. And we won't talk about the fleas, lice, and rats, we'll just leave that aside, but needless to say, the dangers were many, fevers and disease. Would they return at all? And if so, when? And when the captain came back, what would he have for profit? So I read that a captain could typically count on 1/8 of the lay being the overall takings of a journey. And that doesn't seem too bad when you consider there were mates and all sorts of hands. But then what if you don't find the whales? What if you're just in the wrong, sort of sea path? What if the goods are damaged or stolen, right? What if something happens on that voyage? You can't count on what you will bring home with you. So we know that many were prosperous and built fine homes, but I'm sure it was a struggle for just as many of them, right? And it took years possibly to establish themselves and their families. So imagine you are Jarvis Pettibone. You have survived 3 years at sea through all those dangers of various kinds, and you find your wife has a lover and you catch them. Rock in a hard place, right? What do you do? Well, divorce was not unknown. Divorce had been around for some time. However, you can imagine it was frowned upon. You would not be considered good society should you indulge in a divorce. And also, it would take a great deal of time, as I understand it, to get divorced in Connecticut because your case had to go to Hartford court. And there it would languish until there was absolutely nothing better to do. Now, can you imagine the time it would take to work through this process if you had courage enough to initiate it? There's Abigail. She's abandoned and alone for years at a time, possibly. We see that Jarvis has a hard life to survive. He comes home and finds his wife has been unfaithful. A rock in a hard place. So, to round out the love triangle, I created 2 more characters, and this one is based on fact. How many have been to the Phelps Tavern, taken a tour? Good. So, Charlotte Pettibone is based on the young woman that you might have encountered when you go up the stairs and you go to a room that was created for the sister of Jeffrey Orson Phelps, who was the tavern keeper in 1830, and her name was, Fanny Rosanna Phelps Pettibone. And she was widowed young, very sadly. She was widowed young, and she had a young daughter named Charlotte, who was about 4 years old when her father died. And so this room is set up as a replica of a room that might have been set up for Fanny if she came to stay with her brother, which was a common recourse for unmarried sisters at that time. You would rely on your brothers. So this room is really lovely. It's got a beautiful canopy bed with the lace hangings, right? And a little trundle for Charlotte underneath. It's really adorable. And in the corner, there's a roll-top desk. And above that desk, there's a portrait of a young woman who has sort of medium brown, little auburn hair. She's in a peach-colored frock, I believe, and it's just a very charming little portrait. And that was Charlotte Pettibone as a teenager, or in her, early 20s. And she attended the Hartford Female Seminary, the Catherine Beecher School. So these facts I used to create Charlotte Pettibone, who is Jarvis's sister in the tale. She's a different branch of the family, but I brought her in and tried to base her on fact. So Charlotte has had in the view of the 1830s, I tried to roll in what her circumstances would be, what would have affected her. So she has a disadvantage and she has an asset. Her disadvantage is that she was a victim of the spotted fever that we mentioned earlier. Now, the spotted fever mystified the medical community of the time. They thought it was some manner of typhus. They really could not nail it down. Now it looks closer to encephalitis, like a swelling of the brain. It was lethal. It was like COVID. It spread very quickly. It spread through hugging, kissing, breathing. You know, you could be alive at noon, at lunchtime, and dead by 3 o'clock. It moved very quickly. And again, it took about 100 citizens here in town. Now, you could survive. In fact, there's a notable survivor, Alice Cogswell, who started the West Hartford School for the Deaf. She had the spotted fever at age 2, and she survived it, but she lost her hearing. And I believe she went on to found the school, and it certainly didn't stop her. She became a great inspirational figure in our history, right? So here is Charlotte Pettibone. When she was a young girl, she had the spotted fever, and she is left with some markings, red shadows and rashes that were typical on your arms, on your neck, swellings on your face that will not go down. So she is mildly affected by these. But as a young woman in 1830, marriage is your best option. So she feels at a disadvantage with all the other girls who do not have this misfortune at their backs. On the other hand, Charlotte has an advantage in that she went to the Catherine Beecher Seminary and was enlightened and inspired by Catherine Beecher, sister to Harriet Beecher Stowe, who herself lost her fiancé in 1822 at sea. Very sad story. But it seems that that was a moment when Catherine decided, I'm going to invest myself in women's welfare. I'm going to go into education. I want to see that women become cultivated companions for their husbands instead of women are here and men are here and we don't have much to talk about. In between, we aren't allowed in each other's matters. She wanted women to be better read. She wanted them to be better educated and brought along so that they could be more equal partners in their marriage and have a richness there. They could be the model citizens who shaped their children so that they in turn could be model citizens for the future. And of course all this was the beginning of the suffrage movement as well. So Charlotte had the advantage of attending this academy and benefiting from it tremendously. Now as the story opens, she has met a few months ago, she had met a very nice young man that she had known as a youth. She has not seen him for some years. They rediscover each other and they become engaged. So as the story opens, their engagement has just been announced. And she has her insecurities and her fears. Will he change his mind? She's very happy that life is opening out for her and she's being treated like other women her age, other young girls who are getting ready for their lives. And she has great hopes. She's going to be that cultivated companion, the wonderful mother. But then an accident of fate during the church picnic, that's the opening event in the story. Her fiancé's gaze turns from her to her sister-in-law, Abigail. And this is where the love triangle begins. Imagine Charlotte's dismay. Imagine how Charlotte must feel this bright and shining future finally opening up for her. And then it's endangered. Now, she is a lady at home, as mentioned. She lives with her aunt and uncle, or you would live with your primary family until you married. If your parents were in age, of course, you would take care of them. You would be dependent, ultimately, once they passed, on your brothers, right? So we see this in Jane Austen. You know, they really had to hope that the brothers would come through and provide them with a cottage and provide them with a living. So you would be shuttled as a single woman, a single sister, from household to household, whoever needed nursing, whoever needed childcare. Your life really wasn't your own. You were welcome in every house and maybe even treasured, but you did not have a stake of your own. If you were a widow, your husband would provide for you in his will and leave you what was called the widow's third, Sometimes you would have a room, you would have a wing in a house, right? And you could count on your room or your portion of the home, maybe a carriage to get you around town, goods and firewood and food. Your son was supposed to provide these things for you, but as an unmarried sister, your life was very precarious. So imagine how Charlotte feels when she observes that something is changing in her relationship. And now the last member of this love triangle. Here we have Nathan Hart. Now he is fictional, I will confess. The Hart name is well represented in our cemetery there. But he is a representative of the early industrial workers here in Simsbury. When you look at the 1830s, we were right on the cusp of a great many things. We were going from an agrarian way of life, living on the farm, to industrial, innovations and beginning to find different sorts of jobs from the typical and traditional. We were moving from coach travel and canal travel to locomotive travel. That came in about 1832, I believe, in Connecticut. And then, as just mentioned, we were moving from women in the home to women being educated, women being given agency, women having jobs, possibly, in the factories outside the home. And some of the industries here in Simsbury included a cotton mill, a wire factory, a tin factory. We know there was a big carpet factory over toward Terraville. Those were the bigger, in addition to some distillers and tanneries, those were the businesses. But we see that Nathan Hart, who was born to a good family, but they fell on hard circumstances, so he is not as well off as he would like to be. He worked for Richard Bacon, which was the forerunner of Ensign Bickford, which I'm sure we all know, right? Richard Bacon began that work on his homestead in Utah. You can see the homestead still there, I believe. There's the house, the barn. And what they did in this early work was they stuffed goose quills with explosive powder. Imagine how dangerous that was. Eventually they moved to rope and flax and hemp and, created a fuse long enough that if you set it alight, you could get well out of the way before things detonated, right? But they began with things like goose feathers to start their experiments. Richard Bacon began the work with his sons, and then he was awarded a royal patent from England, which, just a great honor, and then Englishmen started to come over. We have Joseph Toy, who is found up in our cemetery here, as well as Reverend McLean. I can tell you more if you're interested about where to find these people in our cemetery afterward. Joseph Toy has a lovely marker here. Then William Bickford, who began fuse work in Cornwall, he came over, and they all began to work together. Ensign was a son-in-law. I can't remember whether it was Toy or Bickford, but he was a son-in-law, and he became part of the business. And eventually, depending on the account that you read, Richard Bacon was either bought out or pushed out. I don't know which. It would be interesting to find out. So Nathan Hart works with Richard Bacon, his sons, is an early industrial worker. And yet, how dangerous. I have to read you this. Another marker in our cemetery, right near Joseph Toy, and I'm sure you've heard this story. There's a little obelisk, it's a brown stone, I think, or sandstone, right next to the granite, the gray granite of Joseph Toy, in memory of 8 young women who perished in the explosion and burning of Toy Bickford Co.'s fuse factory in Simsbury, Connecticut, December 20th, 1859. They met, that happy band, no thought of ill clouded a brow or checked a heart's glad thrill. Ere one brief hour on rapid wings had fled, all were numbered with the silent dead. In such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man cometh. So you can see, that was 1859, about 20, 30 years after the early experimentation that Richard Bacon began, that turned into Ensign Bickford. This is dangerous work, and Nathan's heart is not in it. He is now engaged to Charlotte, and the Pettibones are prominent in town and have been for a long time. They were here since the 1640s, I believe. And so he needs to make his way. He needs to make his fortune. So he becomes a little bit desperate. And even more so when all of a sudden, as opposed to finding Charlotte, the captivating love of his life, his gaze begins to turn to Abigail. Right? So he has to think of what he's going to do with his life. Will he stay in his hometown where he is known? Everybody knows his family. It's comfortable. That was, very typical. It was, in Ireland, if you moved from your hometown, everybody said, well, you must be a murderer. You must have done something, because you'd be living there still, if you didn't have a problem. So Nathan has to decide what to do. How is he going to make his fortune? Is he going to make this life with Charlotte? What are his choices? Right? What are his options? And he considers the Western Reserve, which had been an expedient of Connecticut young men since the 1700s. A royal charter granted land, I believe, in Ohio for workers who would go out and take a few acres and improve them and make them their own. And then you would have a stake, you would have something of your own. You would have something to fall back on, somewhere to raise a family, right? So it's this idea that is in Nathan Hart's mind. He has many difficult decisions to make. So, just to round up a few quick points, we see Minister McLean, a minister in a time of change, trying to bring his flock back to worship. At the same time, there's change in society, right? And he is trying to work with it, but not at the loss of faith to his congregants. We see Jarvis, a sea captain, who is never home and often endangered. We see Abigail, a wife left alone for months, possibly years. It does not mention that she has children, and I think that would be a rich piece of the legend if we capped it off saying, leaving 3 children motherless. We don't do that. So I wonder, was Abigail childless? Right? This would add a whole new dimension to the dynamics and to the story. There was a high mortality rate because we see how dangerous work was, whether it was on the farm, whether it was in industry. If you were born in 1830 as a man, your life expectancy would be 41, right? If you lived past the age of 5, it would jump to 51, and women would be 42 and 52, just 1 year's difference, 42 and 52. So we married younger, we had families younger, we didn't have time to waste, and every day was precious, and I think people must have been so much more conscious of their mortality that, we can be in modern times when we have advances in medicine. We see that nothing could be done for Charlotte and her disfigurements. If Abigail was childless, there was nothing to be done about that. These were circumstances that they had to live in and cope with on a regular basis. We see education and shifting roles for women, which opened up opportunities, but it was frightening as well. And it was all on the experimental stage. We didn't know if we stepped out, would it work, would it not? Were we better where we are? Were we better taking a step? Hard to know. Then we see the industrial and travel opportunities that roll into that. And again, a time of hope and uncertainty. So this was the backdrop for the love triangle as I tried to bring it into the story. And now we will end with the haunting. So there are many stories of hauntings at the Pettibone Tavern, and a great many, again, just to mention Dory Zinsky's book, historic Simsbury and Avon, Haunted Simsbury and Avon. Wonderful book. I'm going to give a presentation actually at the Bell and Raven on October 17th, Friday, and it will be a compilation of all the ghost stories that I was able to find, well, as many as I could fit into a presentation about Abigail's. So, I invite you to check out Bell and Raven online if you want to come and talk about the paranormal specifically, but I'll end with one slide here on the paranormal. So, when we consider the location of the Pettibone Tavern, it plays into the fact that the tavern itself, imagine hundreds of years of energies, if you believe in this. Energies from east, south, north, west, many, many travelers on many, many missions, right? Joyful reunions, sorrowful, illnesses and passings, and everything in between, right? It is near a water course. When we go out the front door, say you're leaving after a fabulous lunch, you look to your left, and we see the river right there. Now, in paranormal circuits, it's thought that water is a very powerful conduit to supernatural energy. If it's raining, which it has been, if it's raining, if there's a water course nearby, more likelihood that you will encounter some spirits who gather energy there from. We see too that it is right between two crossroads, something that I hadn't originally considered until I started diving in. We have the crossroad on the left as you're facing this way that goes to Bloomfield and West Hartford, back to Weetah and Terrorville. We have one on the other side, right where the traffic light is, right? It goes ahead to Avon and Farmington, back to Granby and through town. So crossroads are also very powerful locations when we talk about the supernatural, beginning with the Greek goddess Hecate, who is often depicted in pictures, holding a torch above her head at a crossroads where all the roads meet, and she has a little dog at her side, and she rules the fates. So this is where you would go at midnight to do your deal with the devil. I'm sure we've read legends and stories. You would go to the crossroad at night. Or, failing that, you could write your secret wish on a piece of paper, put a little token, something of value in there, and go and bury it as close to the center of the crossroad as you could, in the hope that your secret wish, would come true. And we know that historically in England as well as in New England, crossroads were used for any number of social community purposes. We had weddings at crossroads. We had market days at crossroads, and still do. We had hangings at crossroads. So when you see that Abigail sits here, right next to a water course, right between two crossroads, the energy. Imagine, how could it not be haunted? And then harking back to the seasonal morgue idea, how could it not be haunted? Right? So there are many kinds of hauntings, and be patient with me if these are things that are already familiar to you, but just to cover these particular ones, just because they're the most different, but they also seem to be pretty prevalent at Abigail's, you have residual haunting. And this is like watching a movie. You have repeated scenes, and they will always be the same, just like watching your favorite scene in a movie over and over again. They will never change. And the entity is not aware of you. They're going about their business. They're in their time, they're in their place, they're doing something that is familiar and comforting to them, or they are in a moment before something tragic happens to them, or they are reliving something of their own. Now, this is not to say there's not a message for you, because if they appear, they want to share something with you. They want you to see this moment. They want to be acknowledged somehow. But if you speak to them, they will not answer you. They're going about their business. The other kind of haunting, just out of these two, and again, there are many poltergeists and everything, we have intelligent hauntings. And these are interactive, responsive events. This is where the ghost sees you and you know it. And sometimes they tell you to get out, and you do. Or you can speak to them if you choose. There is an interaction and a sentient knowledge that you are there and you are being seen. And that perhaps it's on purpose, that you are specifically are being appeared to. Right? So this is an interchange in real time. And again, there's usually a reason or a message. Are they going to tell you where the latest copy of the will is? Are they going to tell you where, the money's buried in the coffee can in the backyard? Is there something they want to prevent or help you with? They want to come and tell you. Sometimes it's more spectral and, sinister than that, but sometimes there is a reason why you are chosen to have that interaction. Do they dislike that you are remodeling the house? That's a big one. They do not like having their environments changed by all accounts. So these are two of the different kinds of hauntings, and poltergeist also very common at Abigail's, as I understand it. I'm going to share with you one particular story, and this was told to Dave and I when we went for our tour. And the manager there, she had only been there, we went early spring, so I think she had been there maybe 5-6 months. And she said that a patron had come up to her and said, I love Abigail. Abigail is my girl, and I want to tell you why. So the manager listened as the patron told her that some years before, she had her first pregnancy, and she was very unwell. Sadly, she was just desperately unwell. And of course, imagine, you're over dinner with the family, there's aromas of every kind, there's food all around, poor woman, she was just very sick. So she excused herself from the table, fled up to the second floor women's ladies, right? The ladies' room that we all know, I can tell, we know that's the hot spot. That's one of the hot spots in the inn. She fled upstairs, got installed, shut the door and locked it, and was desperately ill. But not so ill that she could not feel a gentle pair of hands come down around the sides of her face, gather up her hair, and hold it off to the side. And a gentle hand began to rub her back in a slow, circular motion to bring her some ease in the midst of her sickness. She was not so unwell that she did not know that nobody had come through that locked stall door. She knew she was not alone, and that Abigail had come to comfort her. And this was the story that she shared with the manager. And I won't give any spoilers, but I will say it is consistent with the book, which was almost done at that point. It is consistent with some facts that I chose, facts and fictions that I chose to weave into Abigail's story. And with that, I will say thank you. So, question and answer, and I always used to tell my students, no question is too small, no question is stupid, don't ever tell me your question's stupid, just if there's anything we want to ask, anything we want to say, a story we want to tell, please.
How do they know it's Abigail? Because I've heard that that's like a portal, that building, and there's a lot of spirits that pass through there. How do people know that Abigail is there? I mean,
That's a
she
good
talked to
question.
anybody or said, I'm Abigail? Or
I wish, because we didn't ask any questions, we were just sort of listening and sort of taken aback. That's a really good question. The young woman felt that it was her. I don't know if she intuitively knew that, or if something was said.
Because I've been told that that's a portal and that there's a lot of spirits that pass through that
That
building.
makes sense. That makes perfect
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And I also heard that there was a child that was killed at the river. When I first moved here, that there was a young child that was either drowned or killed or something, that young child might be also there.
Is that the one that has the marker? It's 11 years old.
Oh, okay. Is there one?
I don't know if it's in the same place.
That's a good point. I've seen several stories to do with children, and you're right, we have markers in town
There's two of
that
them.
on the face of them, it look like grave markers, but they're actually accident stones.
Accident
Is
stones,
that
yeah.
right?
Oh,
That's
okay.
what yeah.
But that's where the accident happened.
That's where the accident happened, and they just, and people put
Yeah.
flowers on them now.
We have Terry from the Avon Historical Society.
And I grew up here in Simsbury.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
probably riding shotgun, so.
Yeah, that's okay. You're doing fine.
Thank you, I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are stories of several children, and I'm gonna roll that into the paranormal presentation at Bell Raven. There was a little boy, and there was, like you said, like an 11-year-old girl, and you're right, they're seen running around upstairs. Now, when you consider, like you said, the river's right there, that makes perfect sense. And also the carriages coming and going, because I saw an accident stone over near Ellington, and a little boy had been crushed under the wheels of a carriage. I mean, you can imagine the mayhem, and everyone had several little children. Women and children were traveling in coaches by 1830. Before that, women were not so much allowed to travel, but by that point, there were certainly children being brought, and so there are a number of stories about that. And it's just so sad and whatever to think, and yet sometimes they're giggling, sometimes they want to play and they want to make contact with someone who can see them. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if the river wasn't a major factor in any accidents that have happened there. This is excellent, yes.
Do we have grave markers for the Pettibones, Abigail? Are they buried in the cemetery in town?
So at this cemetery here, yeah, in Hot Meadow, we can find some of the people that I found here. I have not found Abigail, to be honest, but Virgil Pettibone is in the cemetery. If you go in the central gate and you go up the alley, the Pettibones are mainly about a third of the way up on the left-hand side. So you'll see Captain Jonathan there, you'll see Virgil there, and some other relatives. The Abigail, I'm not sure, like I said, I haven't been able to really.
They would do cremation.
No. They felt you wouldn't rise to meet the judgment, that you had to be intact. And some people still believe that, you don't want to disrupt a body because, and other people say it's perfectly fine because it's your spirit, so there's, but at that time, you're absolutely right, they would all have been buried.
And facing east. You had to be facing east so that you would rise with Christ when they took you up. So that's why the stones are facing this way, because it's facing east.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
how,
maybe
that's
I
why
should
that's
move
more
my bed
cemetery.
in case I die while I sleep.
Just in case.
I'm facing south.
We're all gonna go home and rearrange some furniture.
But did your research find that, that he cut her head off, like he decapitated her?
I could not find exactly what was done, so that also had to be rolled in. Just to finish with the grave marker, if we go up, you go up further, almost to the top, about 2/3 of the way up, you'll find the gray marble marker to Reverend McLean and his two wives, Sally Pratt and Nancy Morgan. And it's very humble, but it's right next to one of the U's, and it's, a substantial marker. His children, some of his children are buried up at the top. There's a Celtic cross there, probably going back to the Scottish roots that they had. That's up at the top on the left-hand side. If you want to find Joseph Toy and some of the Bickford people, they are up that same alley, right before the road that crosses to your right. He's immediately to the right, Joseph Toy, Kim Morning, a really lovely sort of oblong monument. And next to him, the girls who died in the explosion. But there, some of the names are peppered throughout, like Phelps, they're sort of peppered throughout because they existed at all different times in history. But yeah, some of the figures you can find there for sure. Jeffrey Orson Phelps is at the top of the hill on the right, I believe. Sister to Charlotte, or brother. Am I tired? Brother to Charlotte. So yeah, some of the people can be found there. Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think who.
I have a quick comment. So I remember when that place was a chart house, which had been, I don't know if it was 20 years or how long ago it was. But I do remember walking up that staircase to that bathroom when you said that, and it was the eeriest feeling. And I can't just say anything happened, except it was this, like, power. I don't know, walking up those stairs, I just went down and I said, that's really strange.
Really? So you had a sense, you felt it.
Was that the main
Sense of
stairs in the middle,
something.
they kind of go up and then turn?
They were kind of.
The ones on the side.
Wow,
they go
wait.
right
Oh,
up.
side
ones, yes, okay.
creaked a little and I went up there, and it was so long, I just always have that memory of it, and then I was thinking, what made them call it Abigail's after the chart house?
I can't.
Oh, the portrait. The portrait that somebody put there, they took,
That came
cut her head out of the portrait, glued it back in so you saw the circle around it, and named it Abigail. That wasn't her, I don't think that was her portrait. I'm fairly sure it was not
I
her
agree,
portrait.
there's some
But
doubt
there
about
was,
it.
there was a very much a doubt, but I liked how they did it because they invoked the story and it got people to the restaurant. I think, to be honest with you, that had a lot to do with it because that's what they did.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Yeah,
I remember that
there's
portrait
question.
looking at it, it's like the cutout of her face and they slapped it back on and there it is.
Yeah, they said they found it in the
Because you
basement.
have to
They
do
found
it.
it in the wall. They
We don't
found
know
the
that. I
little
don't think
circular
we know.
face in the basement among some, in the
Yeah.
sand or something, and they brought it back up. There is some question about whether that is Abigail. And again, was she born a Pettibone? Because supposedly the Pettibone mother in the portrait, some people say that was Virgil because little boys wore dresses back in the day. So they say it was actually Virgil, one of the brothers of the family. And then you say to yourself, well, it was Abigail. And this is where things started to bog down because I couldn't find just the right connections, right? So, yeah, that's a legitimate question. And as you say, they created their own You know,
Great.
but supposedly Abigail's room was on the second floor, you know, when she lived there. And so, you know, if you read the story, you'll see what I did with the ladies' room, but it's on the same floor, and it does play into the original events, as I wrote them, as I imagined that I tried to bring them together. Yes?
Back in the seventies, I think, is when it, was one of the renovations. And a good friend of mine who lived here in Simsbury told me about the portrait and about
Really?
that, that the family were so humiliated because of her indiscretion that they wiped her out of the town records. And maybe you could tell if they did or they didn't, but that's what I was told. They wiped her out of the records and they cut her out of the portrait, and that they found it in the wall. They found the picture,
Okay.
found the portrait inside the wall, and when they were doing the major renovations, they found and put that back, and that he said that when they put her back in her portrait, that's when she started haunting the tavern. That's the story I was told, and that was, I graduated from high school in '74, so it was probably 1972 that I was told this.
That's
The
fascinating.
other thing is that my roommate, she again said it today, she worked at Abigail's for a very short time. She was carrying margaritas down the stairs on a tray, and somebody behind her pushed her. And all the drinks went everywhere, and she got fired the next day.
Oh, no.
But she fell, there was no one behind her, but she got pushed.
Was she okay? Was she hurt?
Oh, yeah, she was fine, she didn't, but, you know,
They fired her.
yeah, because maybe it was Abigail that pushed her.
You wonder, and she's not the only person to have been pushed on that staircase. Like, you would think like the stories would sort of bear her out a little bit. I mean, just one tray of drinks, I mean, that could happen to anybody. I've done it. So you have raised a whole sort of second myth, you know, and that would actually make me feel better in being indecisive and trying to bring together several Abigails. If she's just not there to find, that makes me feel a little better, because I'm like, there's not one person who
Have there
really.
been other people pushed? Janice?
I know, I have heard other people say that they have felt something there, or experienced, or went up to the attic for something, and they found the lights on, and the lights
The
weren't.
lights thing, I was just about to say that, in the
Yeah.
'70s, there was a big deal about the lights, because I grew up here and I went to high school in the
Even when I
'70s
got
here, and
there,
there was
so I
a
moved-
lot
yeah.
about the lights
I
going
moved here
on and
20
off.
something years ago, and they were telling me.
Oh,
people
yeah,
worked yourself
2 or 3
over.
o'clock in the morning, everything
Yeah.
would be lit up, and then they'd go off, and there would be a light flickering, and you'd see, yeah, that was a big time in the '70s.
And there was also one of those ghost hunter people that came and did.
Yeah, I think the Warrens
It's still
came.
happening.
I think the Warrens came, but I don't know if it was, I don't think they did a television show about it, but I think the Warrens did come look at it and do something, but I don't know if that's ever been like recorded anywhere, I don't remember, but I.
You know,
believe
they
it.
didn't mention, I asked them to tell me, you know, which paranormal groups had been, because they did say that paranormal groups had come. Ghost hunters apparently
Yeah.
at one point.
And it wasn't that long ago, it was
Yeah,
like in
you're
the
right.
last 10 years, I think.
Oh, and I loved that too, but apparently, in one version of the story, all their equipment got shut down. None of their equipment would work, and so they couldn't proceed with the investigation. So that's one version of, you know, what you wish they've been able to sort of follow. But we can see, obviously, we all know. It doesn't matter, you know, if the officials come in, because obviously we've had experiences. Please.
Yeah, so I had an experience I just wanted to share.
Please.
There. It was on the second floor, so we were having dinner, it was like an anniversary or whatever.
Nice.
And I had to go to the bathroom, which I oftentimes go to the bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
So I go into the bathroom and I come out and I just had this feeling that I needed to do something. It was just this feeling that I needed to check on something. So, and I wasn't sure what it was, so I went back to my seat and I said to my husband, I just need to go over to that table. That table is like, it's telling me that it's calling me, like something over there's close. So I go over to the table, and on the chair is a candle, and it was just about to catch the tablecloth. So, and I just, that is so weird, how would I have ever known, except for, some message, so I took it, put it on the table, and I blew it out, just because I felt like,
You could have saved that from a second, third.
Burn down again, yeah.
But I noticed that I definitely, there's energy there for sure, and for me, it's not negative, it was a positive thing, but.
Wow, so you were sort of instrumental in you received a lot, like just at the rate, you saved the tavern. Isn't that amazing?
I mean, I don't know, maybe it was probably, maybe it wouldn't have caught fire, but it was weird that I had that message, like, you need to go do this.
Wow.
And I wasn't sure what it was at first, but then once I walked by the table, I realized, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, I'm supposed to get this candle out of the way.
Do you have other experiences?
Yeah, I mean,
places in
I've
general?
had, I call myself like a sensitive, I guess, I mean, I didn't know it, but I've had experiences when I was younger. So I had experiences in old buildings, but I discovered that when I touch something old, I get experiences, feelings, visions. So it's just something I didn't know I had, but it's, it's developed over time.
That's marvelous. So is that something that you like to work with? Or is
Yes.
it something that you try to block?
No, I think I blocked it when I was younger, because I used to, I would ride the public bus and I would hear all this chatter. And I realized later it was probably other people's feelings or thoughts, and so I just thought, this must be something wrong with me, I think I'm crazy. So I shut it down, but then as time went on, I realized, talking to other people, okay, I'm not crazy, this is probably, I'm sensitive and I'm hearing maybe response, I'm not really sure. But I was part of an organization that helped me develop my skills too, so that made it a little bit easier.
That's what, it's a gift. I think that's a wonderful thing. So how is this for you? You should have a talk with my husband. You guys should get together and have a little support.
I observe, I go, aside from some incidents after my mother passed with lights doing very strange things,
Yeah.
and circuit breakers tripping, which I feel was something, that's the only time I've ever had anything that I could ascribe to.
But I think when he met me, he was a complete skeptic.
Yeah,
But
I've
he's
come a long
seen
way, 20
experiences
years.
that I've had, and just kind of, he's wondering.
I used to be a hard science guy, I think it's determined,
Yeah.
but I've changed.
So you're
Do you-
open now to
I'm very
possibilities, right?
Kara, do you think the owners of Abigail's would want a paranormal group to come in and do anything? And the reason I say that is because as president of a historical society, I got an email 2 weeks ago from a paranormal group here in Connecticut saying, we're reaching out to all historical societies to ask what houses and buildings we can go into. And I thought, well, we don't have anything like that in Avon that I know of, but that's anything like this. And I didn't know what to do with the email, and I just wrote back and said, I'm sorry, I have nothing in Avon to suggest. And I'm thinking afterwards, what am I suggesting? I mean, what am I doing? I mean, I don't want to be opening up somebody's house without their permission. That was crazy, and I would never point somebody in a direction like that. But if they would, I could dig up that email and give it to them if you think they would be open to that. I don't know anything about this paranormal stuff. It's not my thing. I'm not a skeptic, it's just that I've never delved in it, so other than seeing what's on TV. But if they're interested in, these stories persist. I mean, I've heard about it for years.
So, but you did a wonderful renovation on your own historical society.
Yeah, we just opened a new museum 2 weeks ago.
Is that,
Yeah, the schoolhouse,
would
yeah.
there be any?
Yeah.
There be anything there for them to know?
No.
Not so
No, but I just, now that you're saying this, I'm just, wondering, because Abigail's is kind of a public building, more or less,
Well,
open to the public, so.
It's interesting, and I don't know if you should go by me, maybe if you contacted them directly, because as we see, maybe they're interested in the creation and furthering of their myths, which we all know and love and go to be part of. We look around and we want to see if we have an experience. They were not particularly interested in my book, even though I consulted them. We got a tour. and Dave just made the point, they're part of a group.
Yeah, right.
So they
Corporate.
might be like, well, we don't really do that sort of thing. On the other hand, like I said, they might say, wow, this is just what we need. We haven't had one of those in a while, why not?
Is that portrait still in there?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, we saw it the other day.
Yeah, okay, I said, yeah, if she's still there, then,
I think it would be good for business.
that's what I'm thinking, that's what I'm thinking.
They were seen on TV and the people, I'm gonna go check out that, I'm gonna go eat dinner, so I go to the bathroom and check it out.
The bathroom will become the most popular room in the whole.
Excuse me, I need to go to the restroom like 10 times during dinner. That would be funny.
The house across the street, very interesting too.
Yeah.
At the other end of that tunnel.
Someone
So
we know went to dinner with the people in that house and they said, I wish I'd known because I would have looked around more.
Do you know who grew up in that house?
Go ahead.
The woman who owns the flower house in Avon, Chrissy DeSopo. That's the Shope's house. Her father was an antique dealer, and she grew up in that house. And the two or three women who wrote the book on the history of Weetag, Chrissy has a couple stories in there of things that happened around that house. And, yeah, so that she grew up in there, yeah, and she was a year ahead of me in high school. But we've talked about the house, but I didn't know about the tunnel to that house. The things I always learned about when I was with the Simsbury Historical years ago was a possible tunnel, and maybe not a tunnel, but a path out to the river.
Yeah.
For bringing the Underground Railroad folks through, because they came up the river, and we're now investigating a house on Nod Road that we're pretty sure might have been on the Underground Railroad, and that would make sense because the river's right there, and of course the river comes up right into Simsbury, so I mean, you can kind of see it in your head, Farmington and Avon and Simsbury, Granby, and then heading up and going from there. So, anyway, I don't know what that connection's gonna
That
be,
makes
but
perfect sense,
we're working through that.
That makes perfect
But I've
sense.
always heard that there was folks that got off and either got into the tavern and hid out there until they got some food, got some rest, and then went back on their journey off. But I don't think, and kind of like in Avon, we don't know who passed through, and that's what folks want to know. Not just where the house was that might have been on the railroad, but how many people, how many men, how many women, how many children. Nobody kept those records. It was an Underground Railroad for a reason. It was underground. You weren't supposed to be marketing it, so you're not gonna really know this, right?
Right.
But that's,
I don't know, here, a house on Nod Road, now this sounds interesting too.
yeah, you drive by it all the time. Everybody sees it. You don't even realize it, but it's the white, if you're coming off of Route 44, taking a left onto Nod Road, so kind of diagonally across from the North House. Yet another house that could have been on the railroad, Underground Railroad as well, because that tavern's been around since 17.
Are you saying that's haunted?
Are you talking
No,
about?
no, anything about the haunting there, but that is an old tavern as well. But diagonally across from that is a white house before you get to St. Francis Medical Center on the left.
Oh, that
There's a
was
White
on
House.
a convalescent home for a little while, wasn't it?
No, it was owned by the Alsop family, but it was built by Amasa Woodford in around 1790. And he became an early abolitionist, and he was the person who went to the legislature to make Avon, because we were part of Farmington, we were called Northington. But anyway, we're pretty sure that he could have been on it, and then it passed on to the Woodford family, and they had a farm there, different Woodfords than the Pick and Patch. Believe it or not, there were two families, but that's a whole different story. And then, so anyway, that house has been sitting vacant since the Foley's bought the.
Old folks home for a little while though.
I don't think they were convalescent. I don't know anything about that, but the Roosevelts used to visit it because they were related to the Alsops. And so we have some weird history on that. The house has a lot
Well,
of
the clock
history.
just chimed.
I'm sorry.
I just realized,
I'm talking.
no, that's okay. Let's keep it going, just informal. Because Sarah's on the clock and let's continue informal.
This is so much fun.
I'm ready. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? I don't know how many of you have read the Abigail Ghost book, but I have read it, and I'm going to guess most of you have read it, but if you haven't, it is absolutely phenomenal, and with your interest, I would think you would absolutely love it. I really recommend it highly, as well as, the other books that are on the table over there. And this guy is pretty phenomenal too. I don't know, like his last book is on the cemeteries, and I know you people are so interested in history, I would think you would love to look into that. Just a recommendation, and a friend. Anyway.
You're a nice friend. Everybody needs a friend like yours.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions, and it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government come together.